the cherry on top of the greatest F1 season ever seen. Welcome back to Motorsport 101. "19 wins in an F1 season." 19. Okay. Normal. Totally normal. Hey, gang. Dre Harrison here, back at it with episode 487 of Motorsport 101. I'm friend and neighbor host Dre Harrison as ever. And yeah, glad you could join us for another pair of episodes from the final week of mainstream motorsport this year.
It's over!
Yay! We're finally done here. It's been a long year. Don't worry, it's totally not going to be even longer next year. Thumbs up emojis. God help us all. Oh man, it's been a long old year, and we're about to put a neat little bow on it. We'll see how we go over the next couple of weeks or so, but we made it. We're at the finish line, and for the next episodes, we're going to wrap up and put a neat little bow on F1 and MotoGP seasons here in 2023. First up, we'll be talking about F1 in Abu Dhabi, and joining me, as ever, first and foremost, Mr. RJ O'Connell. Hello, sir.
Hello. Spent the weekend with friends in Boston this weekend. I finally got to see with my own eyes the famous gas station sign behind the Green Monster at Fenway, but I have not set foot in the baseball stadium.
Really?
Got to change that.
Yeah, I need to at some point. You know, there was a team that played in Boston long ago that occasionally makes homecomings, but you know, affording tickets is hard. And as we've just said, motorsport season is very, very busy, and we all work on call every weekend.
More or less. Yeah, a weekend off wouldn't hurt every once in a while, but that just doesn't happen in this space anymore.
Yeah. No, it's full speed ahead. We want all the racing. We're gonna get it. Gosh dang it!
All of them. Like it's not like Formula One and MotoGP and Formula E. 3 of the 4 series we cover are all going to be having their biggest seasons ever next year. Nope.
Oh, good Lord.
I'm just glad that Super GT is just staying at 8. You know, they just decided we did 8 back in 2011. We decided that's all we need going forward, baby.
Sometimes less is more. Isn't that right, Cam Buckley?
Not in the case of this season. How many more records can my records break? More records.
They can't break any more now because the season's over.
Bold to assume.
There's a few that can still carry over. I'll get to that because I have a full list I concocted for WTF1 earlier in the week. And boy, let me tell you, there is a list. It's a freight train of records. Which we'll get to in a minute. But of course, we've got to talk a little about Abu Dhabi as a race in general. It was a race that certainly happened. And then, to be fair, it wasn't the worst race we've had all year. It was fine. There was some intriguing strategy. Yuki Tsunoda put the whole race on his back. Bless his heart.
Yeah! Driver of the day, Yuki Tsunoda.
First time in his career he's a driver of the day.
Yuki Tsunoda led laps and multiplied Japan's count of laps led in Formula One.
Fun fact, Japan is a country that only ever led 2 laps in F1 history before this past weekend.
And they were all Takuma Sato.
European Grand Prix 2004, I want to say it was, at the Nürburgring. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. Max Verstappen's record-breaking win and record-breaking season. So, yeah, that's fun. We'll talk a little bit about the fight for second in the Constructors' Championship, because that actually did have a semi-intriguing ending. And Charles Leclerc almost being a bit too clever for his own good. We'll get into some of that as well. We'll wrap up some of the main title fights. And we'll talk a little bit about Formula 2, because there's been a lot of a stink kicked up over one of the tweets I put out there this weekend saying we all should be more mad at the Formula 2 situation. Because, hey, Theo Pourchaire, 2023 Formula 2 champion. Good for him. Delighted for him. A real good, happy story. A delightful young man. Feel good victory, but it probably won't make Formula 1. which makes me very sad.
Best I can do is super formula.
Get ready to learn Indy Lights, buddy, etc. So we'll talk a little bit about that problem again towards the end of the show. But places you can find us real quick. We are on Twitter at motorsport_101. Our personal handles are at Dre_WTF1, at RJ O'Connell, and at CBuckley917. You can follow the pod on Instagram at Motorsport101pod as well. And all of those details will be on our website, motorsport101.com. If you really like us as well, you can back us financially on Patreon, patreon.com/motorsport101. You can back us at the $5 level, where you can get early access to all of our episodes. You can back us at the $10 level to get into the supporters club of our Discord server and listen to these episodes live as they're being recorded. I have heard there is some problems with Riverside, so being able to listen in live, I will pass some feedback onto those guys as well, because that's a little bit frustrating as we're offering it as a perk, and yet the site has let us down. It's frustrating. Also, yes, if you want bonus thoughts on both this race and MotoGP, and trust me, I don't normally push it this hard. The MotoGP race review is the biggest one I've ever written on the website. It is nearly 3,000 words deep because there is so much that happened in MotoGP this past week.
Did you think about splitting this into multiple articles?
I did. The thought didn't cross my mind.
It's like just out of nowhere, a relatively tame ... race weekend turns into vending machine of news falling out of the sky.
Intrigue, scandal.
Yeah, one of the
emphasis on scandal.
Yeah, we're going to be recording the MotoGP episode straight after this one. I've got a feeling it might go 90 minutes. It is massively newsworthy. That there
can I just say as well, partially, we're glad to be wrong about something on this.
Absolutely. I thought MotoGP was going to be a stinker. Turns out it was the better race, and there is actually a hell of a lot of newsworthy stuff to talk about off the back of that final weekend. Absolutely mad stuff. So if you're a bike fan, please listen to the next episode as well, because this is going to be about as intriguing as you get for a MotoGP episode, because I can't remember the last time there's been so much news to come off the back of one weekend, including concessions, including Marc Marquez's bonkers Valencia test, and, as I like to say, funny money. That'll all be coming up in the next episode, so do listen to that if you do get a chance as well. So, without further ado, let's get into Formula One in Abu Dhabi.
Well, meet the new boss. It's the same as the other 18 bosses. Abu Dhabi was another case of Max Verstappen's smooth sailing. For the 12th time this season, he qualified on pole. And for the 19th time this season, he went on to win. The 54th of his career, to put him past Sebastian Vettel and on the 3rd on the all-time wins list.
There's two men in history with more wins than Max Verstappen, and he's 26 years old.
He went into 2021 with 10 wins, Dre.
Yeah, remember when the 3 wins and a cloud of dust was as good as it would ever get for this guy for like his entire Red Bull tenure?
This ties a neat little bow on top of a absurd season. And basically, once they bolted the hard tires on, he just pulled away from Leclerc and George Russell in the back half of the race.
Death by 1,000 cuts.
Dre,
Zarbon.
2 or 3 more? 2 or 3 more.
2 or 3 more.
Dre, let's not waste time. You prepared us some numbers on how good all this was for Max Verstappen, the greatest individual season for a Formula One driver in the history of the sport.
You can thank my bosses at WTF1 for this one, but yes, I went stat digging on this one, and these are and brace yourselves, this is going to get ugly. This is the full list of records that Max Verstappen has either extended or broken over the course of 2023. So let's get the easy ones out of the way. Most wins in a season, 19. beating the record he had last year of 15. The highest win percentage in a single season, 86.3%, because he won 19 out of 22 this year. It beats Alberto Ascari's record from 1952 when he won 6 out of 8. The most consecutive wins in a row, we all saw that at Monza when he won 10 straight from Miami through to Monza. That means Max went nearly 4 months unbeaten in the middle of this season. 10 in a row, beating Sebastian Vettel's 9 from 2013. You've got to remember these days speech streak, as I like to call it. He beat his own podium record from 2021. People forget the 21 season, he had 18 podium finishes that year. He pushed that out to 21 this season. The only race he didn't finish on the podium was Singapore. He came in 5th. Everything else was either 1st or 2nd. There wasn't even a 3rd place this year. So 21 podiums on the year. The most consecutive points scored. He has now scored 1,004 consecutive points without stopping. That is a record that used to be held by Lewis Hamilton. This was over 3 seasons that Lewis Hamilton scored 998 consecutive points between the British Grand Prix in 2018 and Bahrain 2020 during COVID season. It's a new record there. Most consecutive points scored, 1,004. Most points in a season, 575.
Ooh, that's a lot, even accounting for point inflation.
Even for point inflation. I mean, look, the old record was 454 that Max had last year in 2022. He's put 121 on it. It's almost the equivalent of 5 more wins on the same number of Grand Prix and sprints, which is just ridiculous. It's the highest percentage of points available in a season. It's 92.7% of all available points he could have scored. Again, his record, he broke his own record from last year. He had 76.1 last year, and that was already an F1 record all time. He's extended that to nearly impossible numbers. The most laps led in a single season, 1,003, which also ties in neatly to highest percentage of laps led in a season, 75.7%. You could pluck out any lap at random across this season. There's a 3 in 4 chance Max Verstappen led it. The old record was 71.4 by Jim Clark in 1963. The most laps in a season record was 739 from Sebastian Vettel in 2011, that season. As Jason quite rightly points out in the chat, 1,003 was the same as Prost and Senna led in the MP4 season of 35 years ago in 1988. Combined. That's how many laps Max led. Most wins from pole in a season, 12. The old record was 9. Nigel Mansell and Sebastian Vettel owned that, 92 and 2011 respectively. The most races left before winning the title, because remember, he won the title at the Qatar sprint race. So he tied Michael Schumacher's record of earliest title win. 6 Grand Prix left on the table. Michael did it in 2002, where he won the French Grand Prix to win the title, and did it with 6 rounds to spare. That was round 11 of a 17-race season. Well, more on that later. Most sprint wins in a season, that's an obvious one. 4 out of 6. Beat his record of 3 from last year. He's now led the championship for 39 races in a row. Beat the record that Michael Schumacher had because Schumacher led 37 straight from 2000 in the US to the 2002 Japanese Grand Prix. So Max has now gone 39 straight rounds since straight leading the championship. That's going back to Spain 2022 last year when he took advantage of Leclerc's engine blowing up. There's a few more here. Biggest championship winning margin, 290 points.
Thumped him 2-1.
Sergio Perez got curb stomped 2-1. The previous record was 155. That was Vettel over Alonso in 2013. This was 290 points, the margin of victory for Max this year. The longest streak of converting pole into the win. He's gone 16 races in a row going back through last season. Now Max has won from pole
Max's poles or Charles Leclerc's poles?
Both.
Oh.
All 5 races that Charles Leclerc qualified on pole in this year, Max would go on to win. Final fun fact there for you. There's a bonus one for you. Max became the 3rd driver in history, just the 3rd driver in history, to finish every single racing lap of a calendar season. The only 2 times that's ever happened was Michael Schumacher again, 2002, and Lewis Hamilton's 2019, where he raced every single lap, didn't lose a single lap all year, no DNFs, no lost laps, nothing. And here's another quirky one I thought you might like. Most pit stops by a winning driver in a race. 6 in Zandvoort. He went through the pit 6 times in that race, and still would go on to win. It ties probably one of the most famous modern races of all time. You can probably guess which one it is. Go on, fellas.
I'm not going to do it to you.
Yes, it's Canada 2011. Jenson Button within the 2011 Canadian Grand Prix. It still stings to this day. But Jenson went through the pits 6 times that race, and that's the only other time it's been done where someone's gone through the pits 6 times and won a Grand Prix. Also a little quirky one as well. He's the first man in history to win 3 Grand Prix in the same country in a year, because he did win all 3 races on American soil.
I need a smoke break now.
It's funny I'd say all this, and the question in my notes was, gents, is this the greatest F1 season ever? As if I need any further, argument to be had about this.
You left one out that was in a headline from race fans. That he could have taken the entire back half of the season off and still had a decent shot to win the championship. I
don't know. He would have won the title if he had taken Belgium forward off, which is just
If Max Verstappen decided after the Belgian Grand Prix, right, I've done all I need to do this season. I am going to go back home and work on my sim racing career. I'm going to go practice portrait painting. I'm going to go sail around the world with my partner. He could have come back and realized, oh yeah, I'm a 3-time Formula One world champion right now.
Another trophy for the mini fridge.
Yeah, it's the only thing. I've got 2 main points I wanted to make on this. Number one, for me, there's no argument. This is the most dominant and greatest F1 season from a driver and from a team I've ever seen. It reminded me of, and as a Jamaican, this means a lot to me, Berlin 2009, the World Athletics Championships, when Usain Bolt ran that 9.58 world record that still stands to this day, might stand forever as one of the most untouchable sporting records of all time. The BBC's got a great athletics commentator called Paul Dickinson, who's been doing it for 30 plus years, and he has seen some shit in the world of athletics in the 3 decades he'd been covering it. And when he saw the time at 9.58, he turned to another great legend of British athletics, Steve Cram, and he just says, I've never seen anything like this before, and I'm unlikely to ever again. Yes, there's every chance that the Red Bull might still be this dominant next year. There's every possibility. But it's not just the winning. It's not just the outrageous stats. It's the execution for me that stands out more than anything else. From every element of this team was firing on all cylinders all year long. They did not give anybody an inch. Singapore was the only weekend as such a freak outlier and unique circuit. That was the only race they didn't win all year. And even then, I think there were still ways they could have won it if safety cars had fallen a certain way. This, I talk about it before, the strategy department of Hannah Schmitz at the front, absolutely perfect, pretty much all year long. The mechanics and the pit crew, outstanding all year long. DHL has their own pit stop championship. Red Bulls won that too.
It's crazy. Does Red Bull's pit crew get enough credit like this? Because the cynics will always say that Verstappen is a car merchant, but we need to start adding Red Bull pit crew merchant to this because they're the best of the best. Because
it was everything. Because in this, and I I can scarcely believe reading this, but after 35 years, the MP44 has been dethroned. The RB19 is statistically the greatest Formula One car ever devised. But it wasn't always like that on paper. A lot of times they actually weren't the quickest car over a lap. No. The X factor of this car was the race pace and the tire wear and just the sheer punishing execution by car, driver, pit crew, pit wall. The reliability engineers, no mechanical retirements on the season.
Zero. They were perfect. They were a bit more vulnerable last year when Max had 2 hydraulic failures early doors and Perez's car conked out in Bahrain. This year, perfect, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, to shatter effectively every record in the book. I mean, I swear your face was turning blue reading off all the records.
I tried.
To stomp out any notion of a competitive season in Bahrain to the point where Mercedes canned the season on the spot. I mean, even at the height of their dominance, Mercedes did not execute every single race across a season like this. They were good for 2 or 3 howlers a season. They gave up nothing.
It's like the early days of that Mercs V8 turbo hybrid dominance when then this era started in 2014. Like Red Bull pretty much won 3 races in 2014 via gimmies. You know, either mechanical retirements or drivers hitting each other. That was the story for the first entire year of the turbo hybrids. 2015, Seb won a couple of rounds on merit. 2016, again. 16 was arguably their magnum opus. They won 19 out of 21 that year, and it still pales in comparison to what this has been. This has been flawless. It's as near to flawless as you will ever see. Like I said, even if they keep this level of dominance for next year, which they've got every chance given they've poured all their resources into next year's car and haven't touched this one since the summer break, which is, again, terrifying.
Right? That's another thing, right? They did this, and regardless of what the dummies on the socials will tell you, a cost cap penalty that involves you losing 10% of your aerodynamic allocation is a big friggin' deal in this sport.
It's significant.
Imagine if this Red Bull was 10% better. What would the season have looked like then?
This sport would have been so close.
It already is. It already is. I mean, the RB20 is already loading. But just the absolute ruthlessness and efficiency with which all parties involved executed this season. We haven't seen just a complete upending of the sport across every aspect of an operation since, like, Ferrari in 02.
That's the only year I'd even put in this conversation. It's in my notes. Michael's 2002 is the only year I would put in the same ballpark or postcode. Like, Alberto Ascari's 52 was great, but it was only over 8 seasons. This was over 17 in 2002. Again, Michael's 02 was ridiculous. He started that year in the 01 car and just racked. Again, it was suffocating. He would just he finished the entire season on the podium in 2002.
They were dominant to the point that they were bringing the sport into disrepute.
Yeah.
They were dominant to the point that Formula One was trying to patch in rules to try and keep this from happening.
Yeah, they were so scared that Ferrari dominance would kill the sport outright that they spent the next 3 years trying to bring them down a peg. They finally got there in 2005 for a year, and then Michael Niddy came back and still won 06. That's the kind of dominance that we're talking about. One that rattles the foundations of the cages of the entire sport as a whole. That's how ridiculous this season has been. Like, Max is superhuman. Like, people quickly want to say, like, people want to say that this is the team suited towards him. No, it's just he is absolutely incredible at extracting the maximum amount of performance out of a car that is difficult to drive.
That's another thing that I was going to bring up, because we talked about it many, many times throughout the show. You know, we've talked a lot about how Sergio Perez has not been able to match up. And you know, we talk a lot about, you know, oh, Sergio Perez is not able to get his qualifying way down the order in the best car that ever was. I really think that this is a masterclass of the drive. Yes, the car is fantastic. There's no question about that. But we all as a whole have got to give some credit to Max Verstappen, who is the most complete driver in the sport right now.
Yeah, I mean, on days where the car maybe didn't have enough in the second half of the season, given they can development, Max made the difference.
He found enough.
On days where Max was scruffy and Max didn't have enough, the car and the team made the difference. And that is really as much as you can ask from any entity in this sport, is they cover all of their weaknesses pretty much ruthlessly.
That's how you win. That's how you win championships. You win them on your bad days, not your good ones. And Red Bull had one bad day all year, and even then, it wasn't a disaster.
Look, we don't even talk about shit like, you know, him finding ways to throw away easily winnable results in Monaco anymore because he clips too much of the inside of the barrier.
That qualifying lap, that sector 3 in Monaco,
that's the lap of the year as far as I'm concerned. He turned on no clip, Dre.
Yeah, he was like, I'm gonna ride. He wall rode round Sector 3, got through Rascasse, and stole pole from Fernando Alonso's hand. And Alonso probably wins that race if he's on pole to start it off. Like, you all know that Monaco qualifying is everything, and Max pulled out the best last sector. The last sector he should have had in Saudi Arabia in 2021. That's where it was. He found it. Look, we are witnessing one of the greatest of all time here. If you have three consecutive championships, you've won 44 Grand Prix in 3 years, including statistically arguably the two greatest F1 seasons we've ever seen, back to back. Before your 27th birthday, you are special on any level, on any context, without any nuance or asterisk that the internet with LH usernames and Whinger Spices want to put out there on Twitter. This man is special on any argument. He is one of the 10 greatest racing drivers of all time now, and he is not 10. And I will happily say this as a Sebastian Vettel fan who had to fight for that man's approval for years and years and years. And Cam knows this. He's been friends with me for a long time. He knows how badly I had to defend that man at times. Right?
I've been in the trenches right next to you.
Max is probably better than him. And that's a terrifying thought, given that
Dre, he's had Ayrton Senna's statistical career minus the pole positions in a 3-year span.
What?
Yeah, three championships and 41 wins was Senna's career.
Yeah, more wins, and just dismantling the record book systematically.
Yeah,
there's a reason why he's the only argument left. Yeah, the pole position's really the only record that he doesn't have. But like, the guy's one of one. It literally began with him being the one of one case of him being barely old enough to compete in Formula One, breaking into the sport as a 17-year-old, and half the people are thinking he's good enough to do it, and the other half's thinking, I don't know.
I openly admit I was never a believer. I thought Eddie Jordan was talking out of his arse when he first saw him as a 17-year-old rookie. I didn't see it. I thought he was a battering ram, who lacked refinement, raw speed maybe, but I never thought that he could be
all the raw
this.
Speed in the world, but unable to harness it properly, and really. I think in the development of all this, you have to look at basically the 2020 season where he spent most of the year thinking about what he was going to have for dinner. Because he was 15 seconds behind the Mercs and 15 seconds ahead of everyone else. And I think one of the best things that I think he could have learned in that time frame, man, he has made Sergio Perez's tire management a non-factor.
That's crazy.
He's nullified it. It doesn't exist anymore because Max is just as good, if not better at it. We saw it in Miami. He was going faster than Checo on 20-lap older tires. That's when I knew it was over. As soon as I saw that, I was like, this championship's done. If Max can beat you that comprehensively, beating you at your own game, in essentially your own backyard, at your signature skill as a racing driver, it's over. That's it. I knew right there and then it was done. I was like, there's no way Perez is going to beat him over a season now. Not a chance. And it ended up being the biggest championship beaten in Formula One history. And let's not forget, Perez was only down by 6 after Baku. And that was 5 rounds in.
Yeah, all the damage was done after.
It's been an onslaught ever since.
Ray, you talked about it, the fact that, you were not one of the believers early on. Do you think the end result as it stands after 2023 matches the hype that you heard, or is it even better?
It's better.
It's unprecedented. We're in uncharted territory statistically.
We have never seen anything like this before. Like, Hamilton has had an all-time great season in the conversation. That was 2019. It was not this. Like Hamilton won 11 Grand Prix that year, not 19. His 2022 had an argument as one of the greatest F1 seasons ever. He's just kicked that into the stratosphere.
Do you remember when we were having 19 race seasons in general, and we're thinking, golly, this is a lot of Grand Prix,
and we lost 2 this year.
This was meant to be a 24 race season. You ended up with 22, and back then, I wasn't sure that Vettel's 13 and Schumacher's 13 they had from 2004 and 2013 would ever be topped. He's added 50% to that record.
I mean, you talk about the pantheon of all-time great Formula One cars. I mean, this has left cars like the F2004, the F2002.
That was a car.
Pretty good car. The
W11.
The W11. I mean,
the holy grail of the Mercs turbo era.
I would still argue it's the 07. I mean,
sure.
It's this and the 07. And very similarly, just if they weren't the ultimate over a single lap, they would tear the field to pieces over a stint, and that's where they pay the points. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it was almost shocking to see, like in the last 2 races of this year, Ferrari could just about hold on to them over a lap, even beat them in the right conditions.
Sure. Charles has had 5 poles this year.
Yeah, and Charles Leclerc is an extraordinary qualifier. We know that.
One of the best I've ever seen.
And if nothing else, that Ferrari power unit generated a hell of a lot of horsepower over 1 lap.
Mm.
And it didn't matter worth a damn. Because as soon as they bolted on the harder tires, as soon as the race pace came into it, the Red Bulls just motored off into the distance.
Yep, it was all they had. And it sums up the last 2 years of Max Verstappen. This is his magnum opus. It's
how does one top this?
It's genuinely mathematically difficult for him to ever top this. It's virtually impossible. Like, he's pushed some of these records so high up, like scoring 92% of all the points in a season that has 22 Grand Prix and 6 sprints. That's virtually unstoppable. You'd have to be winning 21 out of 20. He's probably going to have to win 23 out of 24 next year to top that.
Trey, what's better than losing 1 race across a season?
You tell me, Cam.
Going perfect on the season. That's all that's left.
They can get Singapore in. We'll have a couple of new ones in there. It's going to be. We haven't raced in China in 4 years. That could be interesting.
It cannot happen like this. I know this makes me sound like a hater, but for the sake of everybody else's enjoyment, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Aston Martin, Alpine, we need you to get your shit together.
I'm going to stop you right there. Alpine. Yeah, I mean, like, and at the end of the day, I mean, Dre, I've brought this up in the server a dozen different times. This season was over the day they rolled that car off the truck.
We just didn't know it.
I did.
Well, you did.
I mean, I was in your WTF1 chat going, yeah, we're fucked. Field's fucked.
Yeah.
Year's over. And it actually was better than I thought it was going to be, but only on account of the fact that Ferrari and Mercedes made zero progress over last year. And it took them until very late this season to actually get any understanding out of their cars.
Yeah. Man, what a season, what a year.
Oh yeah, and in this race, you know, all the pressure he faced was Charles Leclerc on the first phase of the stint of the race, and other than that, smooth sailing from there.
I love the post-race interview with Charles Leclerc. It's just like, well, why didn't you go? Why weren't you more aggressive on lap one? Yeah, it would have got me in 3 or 4 laps anyway.
Draw. I think
it's just like it is what it is.
Max Verstappen was having more of an intriguing chat with Fernando Alonso about what they do if they were matching up in GT3 cars.
That would be fun. So let's quickly tie up some of the loose ends behind this race and the rest of the championship, because there was a semi-intriguing fight behind them. There was a fight for second in the Constructors' Championship. Mercedes and Ferrari have 4 points between them going into this one. There were ramifications. Now, Charles Leclerc, I love Charles. The man's got a racing brain. With 3 laps to go, he clocks the situation. He knows Perez is on a time penalty. He's been given a 5-second time penalty for a collision with Lando Norris. We'll get to that in a minute. But he said to his team, keep an eye on the gap. I'm going to let Perez through, and I'm going to try and back Russell up. And try and find a sweet spot where he could possibly re-overtake Perez on time, but keep Russell behind him, so that would give him enough of the point swing to put Ferrari back ahead of Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship. Didn't quite work out. Perez finished 3.9 seconds ahead in the end, and once the 5-second time penalty kicked in, it bumped both Leclerc and Russell back onto the podium in second and third. Perez would end up 4th. Merckx, that would be enough behind Lewis Hamilton's 9th place, his worst finish of the year over the line, funnily enough. Mercedes took second in the Constructors by just 3 points. What did you make of the gamesmanship and Perez's penalty?
I love the sicko behavior behind this.
Charles Leclerc is playing 820D chess.
I love that, man.
I love the racing awareness to know that.
He's got a racing brain.
Execute that.
He has 5 brain cells, and they are all devoted to racing.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Lewis and Carlos picked a hell of a weekend to lay enormous eggs. Because really it came down to the fight. Obviously 4 points up for Mercedes going into this race. And it came down really to Charles and George. George Russell actually had a pretty good weekend to close out the year, considering how...
He was best of the season for me.
I would say so. Considering the junk that he was producing for most of the season. Good way to end out the year. Carlos Sainz.
Dreadful.
Maybe his worst weekend in Formula One.
This is why people believe Carlos Sainz ain't him.
This is exactly why people like me are a bit more cynical about Sainz. I know people that are even more worse than me on this one. Like, look, I think Charles Leclerc is a better Ferrari driver, and I've said this from day one regarding the two of them and their combination together. But this was horrific from Carlos Sainz all weekend long. Yes, he may have had a small excuse in qualifying because he did have a front wing problem that his team had to fix, but he still got, unfortunately, it compromised his entire qualifying session. But even so,
he was bounced in Q1.
He was bounced in Q1, but and then he tried going hard, and then obviously tried to wait for a safety car that never came in the end. But his pace, like, Ferrari had to run harder than him, but Ferrari's got no pace on the hard tyre anyway. So Sainz was just a sitting duck. He started 16th. He would have finished 16th, but he was parked with a lap to go anyway because there was no point in even trying a fastest lap attempt because he wouldn't have gotten the point for it anyway because he was 16th on the road. Horrific.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been taking it off Mercedes because it was in the possession of one Max Verstappen because, he needs more points this year. Yeah. I do like the gamesmanship from Charles. I do think he played it a little bit too soft.
I agree.
When he did it. If you're going to commit to being a sicko, be a sicko.
Do what Checo did in this very Grand Prix 2 years ago. Back that motherfucker up. It's like he still wanted to finish second and still try to find a way to keep George behind him. That was never going to work. Either be prepared to give up.
That was it. Unfortunately, that was the points. He was going to lose the points either way at that point because Perez is just quicker than the both of them down the stretch anyway because he was on fresher tires and a faster car.
Yeah. Great awareness, fantastic awareness of the situation, and playing clever with the time differences and whatnot. I love that about Charles. Like I said, he's got a racing brain. Not many people have that. So that kind of situational awareness. You can't teach that. That's instinct, and that's very impressive from a driving standpoint. A quick mention from me. I think Perez's penalty was bullshit. I think that was a very, very harsh penalty.
Trey, we've had 3 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in a row with incidents at that corner, and all 3 of them were ruled differently. No further action in 2021. Hamilton being told to give the place back last year, and Perez getting a 5-second penalty for causing a collision this year. Knock wappy.
No one knows what a penalty is, baby. Yeah, it's another one that you can look, as a big football fan, I will be the first person to say that insulting the officials is something that we should not do in sports because, for those who don't know, football has a big refereeing problem right now where people do not want to be referees in this country anymore. And no shit, they get abused every single week. They're expected to be perfect.
They get enough from people like us who don't even play the game, man.
Right, and let alone fans and opposing players who get abused as part of their job. It's universally accepted as a part of football, and I can't stand the fact that that's the case. Like I've mentioned on Twitter before, I try very hard not to insult the officials because I'd then be part of the problem, because why would anybody want to be a ref in those sorts of conditions? It doesn't help. It doesn't solve anything. But I can understand why Sergio Perez was so frustrated at the end of the race and ended up facing the stewards himself and was given a formal warning because he said the stewards were not Formula One standard and said that it was a joke that he'd been given that penalty. Now, look, I think it was a harsh call. I don't think that was a penalty, in my opinion. I think that was a classic case of rubbing his racing. Perez made the corner. He kept all 4 wheels in bounds. Yes, there was a bit of contact, but I don't think it warranted Norris cutting the corner in reply to try and maintain position. But, I can get why Checo is so frustrated because, as I've said many a time, and this year has been the worst of it I can remember. No one knows what a penalty is. And it's infuriating. I mean, a quick track back for a second. This is exactly why Gunther Steiner lodged his right to review on the US Grand Prix. It wasn't because he thought he was going to win. It's because he wanted to expose the fact that the entire system is fucking broken. Hence what led to that steward's outburst at the end of the statement saying, "We strongly recommend a solution is found because we can clearly see he's cut the corner, but we can't adjudicate based on it."
I just don't understand. I mean, we fired Michael Massey and penalty and stewarding still isn't fixed.
No more human error champions. No more human error podiums or top 10 finishes or anything like that. That was supposed to be the gambit, right? Hey, On the subject of backing the wagon up going in turn 5, what'd you make of old friends Hamilton and Alonso doing that shit earlier in the race?
I do.
Old dirty bastards.
Old dirty bastards, both of them. Yeah, I mean, it was less a brake test and more DRS chess, as we've seen in the past. I'm still not the biggest fan of it.
I hate it.
But
I get why it's done, but I hate it. It's dangerous.
Yeah. They're really... If you're going to start cracking down on something, start cracking down on the DRS chess.
Yeah. You can't do anything about the detection point. You've got to put it somewhere, but it's silly that we're seeing incidents where drivers are deliberately either slowing down or trying to gain an advantage by quickly whacking the brakes in a shock scenario to try and get DRS for the next zone. I don't like it. I get the cleverness of it, but I'm not a fan of it. I think it's dangerous. It's needlessly dangerous, in my opinion. If you're behind, you're behind. Suck it up.
These two have been doing this shit for 10 years. It's the same thing that went down in Canada 2013.
I remember that.
It's been going on for 15 years after their first year working together didn't go so great.
Old dirty bastards. 42 and they have a combined age of 80. Lewis Hamilton is 39 in January.
They're the old men at the rec play who just play the dirtiest brand of basketball.
Yeah, they're going to kick you in the nuts. There's going to be a throat punch in there somewhere. All the dirt.
Where's the
thumb in the eye? Yeah, it's a thumb in the eye, etc. A quick rundown of some of the extra fights we talked about from last week, just to clear it up. Mercedes, as mentioned, did end up second in the Constructors in the end. They beat Ferrari 409 to 406.
Yeah, we've all been talking about the saddest second place in the Drivers' Champion of Sergio Perez. We need to talk more about the saddest second place in the Constructors with the W13.
Yeah, let's call a spade a spade. The W14's competitive career came to an end today, because today was the post-season test. Mm-hmm. It ended with a catastrophic mechanical failure, pitching George Russell into a wall.
The car gave itself a Viking burial.
Yeah, one last fuck you out the door. This car was pants.
It was just.
And in fact, you do need a wind tunnel to see that.
This car is so ass. How did Ferrari not beat them?
Yeah, I tell you what, we said it.
Because Ferrari's start of the year was so bad, and they coughed up key points down the clutch.
Yeah, Dre, we talked about it. It came to pass. Those 18 points, potentially, that got left on the table in Brazil with that DNS. Crippling.
Yeah.
I mean, both teams did their burning the midnight oil to try and throw away P2 in the Constructors' Championship.
Hamilton had an awful end of the year. George has been below par all year long. Hamilton ran out of steam in the last 4 races of the year.
Yeah, last 3 races of the year, Lewis. Nothing. Carlos Sainz was either blew hotter than the surface of the sun or colder than Pluto. Charles Leclerc's car had a mixture of explosions, crashes, and more explosions.
Mm-hmm.
And George Russell, he went for the gap. If you know, you know.
If you know. Yeah, it's rough out here. So yeah, Mercedes beats Ferrari by 3. Both teams will have years to forget on that one. McLaren did hold off Aston Martin in the end. Aston Martin did have a bit of a late surge towards the end, but sadly Alonso and Stroll couldn't do enough on the last day to potentially upset the apple cart. McLaren winning the fight for 4th with 302 to Aston Martin's 280 in the end. Now I think Aston Martin's it's going to be a very interesting end of season dialogue between Aston Martin and their shareholders, because you got to think, my God, this is still a massive improvement on the year, but how much did they leave on the table?
Can you imagine if you had a team that had Aston Martin's first half of the season and McLaren's second half of the year? My God, that might challenge for second in the Constructors.
They would have gotten second at a canter.
Easy. McLaren had 17 points as a team through the first 8 rounds. They ended on 302. They were tracking for a 550 point season.
Yeah, so McLaren started off with debatably the worst car in Formula One and had it for 7 races. And Aston Martin lost their way in development mid-year. Makes me worry a lot for next year's Aston because the primary, meat of the development of next year's car will have been taking place while they were dicking around mid-season.
And that's the terrifying thing about it from a Mercedes standpoint. Mercedes at no point were the best team on their own power unit, and they still shithoused the second place purely because of lack of errors. It's wild that turned out. I don't think Mercedes, for a consistent period of time, ever had the second best car in F1 this year.
Not for more than 2 races at a time.
No,
at no point. Like it's just the fact, and for all the talk that Mercedes had operational issues, and believe me, they do. They're not the perfectly oiled machine that they were maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
No.
But operationally, they looked mighty relative to Ferrari, who again, bad strategies, god awful tire wear for most of the season.
People say that Ferrari strategy is a tired meme. Well,
it's not going to be a tired meme until Ferrari stops doing it.
Yeah. Dallas Cowboy fans don't get pent up about it because their team hasn't won a Super Bowl in 25 years, even though they are the Tiffany brand of the NFL.
Look, they had pathetic pace on the hard tires relative to their medium pace, so of course they ran Carlos Sainz on the hard tire for the entire race.
I just don't understand that. You've sucked on your hards all year, so that you run 2 hard stints in the race, and you stretched them looking for a safety car that never came. That
was the only play, but even then, I mean, without Nicholas Latifi in the field, it was always a long shot.
Yeah, and then here in the chat says Merckx only got second because Hamilton was consistent all year. Don't get me wrong, bad ending, but Hamilton was incredible this year. Again, just
cut out the final
consistent all year long.
Yeah, you cut out that final 5-race stretch. He's still, for my money, cleanly the second best driver in the field.
Absolutely.
He minimized mistakes. He's able to get the most out of his car whenever he can. We're not an MV33 fan podcast, okay? In case you needed any reinforcement of that. I love this dude.
Look at it like this. I mean, you have to take these two teams fighting for second. The only one who I'd say showed up across the entire year and the driver's seat was probably Charles. And he had enough unreliability that it ended up more or less coming out to a wash. George Russell was a mess this year.
Yeah, George, sophomore slump for Mercedes for him. More on that in our season review in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, this is starting to sound like a season review, but let's tie it up with the middle class.
Yeah, the fight for 7th in the end.
The wooden spoon.
Yeah, like Haas are now confirmed the best worst F1 team of all time. There's no bottom runner in the championship has ever scored as many as 12 points, and yet they're stone dead last.
People try and tell us that Formula One was more competitive 30 years ago when the worst teams in the sport were failing to qualify for races.
No, they were failing to qualify for qualifying.
Yeah. Pre-qualifying exit. Yeah, in the fight for 7th in the end, Williams did just enough to hold on. Yuki Tsunoda had a fantastic race. He really, AlphaTauri went with the bold, all-out strategy of going for a one-stopper. Yuki's pace was genuinely excellent. He tried. The hards didn't quite hold on all the way to the end. He still took home 8th place, which I think is his best finish of the year. Or tied his best finish of the year in Kota. It wasn't quite enough. AlphaTauri only had 25 points to Williams' 28. A phenomenal year for James Vowles at Williams. That is an incredible accomplishment to get off the bottom so comfortably in the end.
They were such a good last. I talked about being a better last going into this year. Well, they were such a good last that they weren't last, second last, or third last.
Dude, it got to the point where Williams scoring points for much of the season wasn't a surprise anymore.
Yeah.
And we just think about a couple years ago, we would just treat it like we just won the war if Williams had scored points in a dry race.
Yeah, I mean, look at the sheer level of poor judgment required in Germany 2019 to salvage a single point from that pile of junk.
Yeah.
Yet here we are, a genuine midfield contender.
This is a team that spent 4 out of the previous 5 seasons stone dead last in the championship, and they finished 7th. That's a phenomenal job by James Vowles. He's come in and he's immediately changed the culture of the team. I know people that work in that Williams team. They speak glowingly of James Vowles, and not just like he gives incredible speeches. He's a proper team guy. He's in the trenches. Everybody loves him at Grove
He's
right
the person they needed, and that's been borne out with their results over the last year. And Alex Albon, low-key driver of the year contender, because he
great season.
Put in a stint this season.
Yeah, he put that team on his back. 27 out of their 28 points came from him. More on that on next week's show, but shout out to him. AlphaTauri salvaged 8th place.
And tell you what, again, not a bad salvage job from AlphaTauri given how pants they were for 3/4 of the season.
Yeah, they've done well to come back out of that. And a salute to Franz Tost in his final race this weekend as team principal before moving on. Laurent Mekies has got a hell of a gig to follow up with in that house. Franz has brought up some of the greatest F1 drivers we've ever seen in this sport and turned this team into a race-winning team. And that takes some doing, without question. He's done a remarkable... I'm glad he got a nice bit of fanfare on the way out as a part of the traveling circus. I think it's like 27, 28 years in that camp overall.
Agree. Like it would have been so rough if like this year this last year of him running the ship would have ended just as terribly as it did. And I'll bite something, Dre, from one of your colleagues, Scott Mitchell-Malm. Like, yes, Yuki Tsunoda will have regrets about how Mexico City went down. Absolutely. That hurts me. But you got to take stock of the fact that without him, when you consider all the turmoil in that other seat, would AlphaTauri even have a chance at fighting for 7th in the championship to begin with?
They wouldn't have. And
no
again,
chance.
Yuki Tsunoda wasn't perfect. He still got some edges to clean up, but his raw speed this year, and
much improved.
I don't think the raw speed was being able to harness it and being able to race with it. He was so much better this year than the last year. And really, last year, talking about 2022, a little bit unlucky given how much AlphaTauri was just awful. And the couple of times he wasn't. One of them, his rear wing disintegrated.
Yeah.
They had to put it back together with duct tape. But and this weekend, with a major upgrade on the car, which is really more of a trial for their 24 car, they had a genuine turn of pace, and Yuki Tsunoda was emphatically quicker than Daniel Ricciardo all weekend.
Yeah, great.
Daniel Ricciardo is
Yuki.
in that. He's in that fight for the Red Bull seat next year.
Yeah, great fight from Yuki. Like I can only echo Cam's sentiment. Far more consistent this year. Far less mistakes. No matter what you say about the quality of the opposition in the other chair, this was a much more consistent, far less error-prone Yuki Tsunoda, and that is a big step in the right direction that I hope he can continue with, because next year will be another big test to be having a full season with Daniel Ricciardo rather than just the slumps of a guy that came in halfway through the year. That's going to be fascinating to see how that turns out. To see if Daniel still has it with a full off season in the wings, or is Yuki improving to the point where he could be a viable contender for a Red Bull seat? It's going to be fascinating to see.
It's going to be fascinating to see what they call this team next year. Racing Bulls Racing Team fans.
That's
Hugo Boss, whatever we're calling it.
Yeah.
Let's go a bit. I know we don't talk about Formula 2 all the time, but we got to give a shout out to Mr. Pomme de Terre himself, Ryan Erking called it when he got up to F3. Theo Pourchaire was going to be that guy, and it turns out in his third season at the age of 20, Theo Pourchaire won the 2023 Formula 2 Championship. It went down to the wire against Frederick Vest, who had 6 wins on the season, by the way. And ART Grand Prix, Theo's team also won the team's title over Prima. But it's led to immediate fan frustration that, barring a miracle, this will be the 3rd year in a row that the Formula 2 champion doesn't get an immediate F1 seat, following Oscar Piastri, who had to spend a year as Alpine's reserve, made the funniest social media tweet of 2022, and Felipe Drugovich, who seems content to wait around for reserve opportunities rather than try and get a seat in another championship. So, Dre, I'll kick it over to you. Just how much of a bottleneck problem does Formula One have? A big one or an enormous one?
This is a problem. This is a serious problem. And look, I will happily say this at the top of this little conversation rather than at the end. There is no easy way of fixing this. I don't think there is a way of fixing this. I think even if some people say, why don't you just let Andretti in? And I'm like, well, Andretti's going to bring in their own dudes.
Andretti's a factory team.
That's not going to solve the issue long term either. It's just going to delay it for another couple of years. Look, 60% of this current grid are junior ladder graduates from 2016 or later. So the last 7 seasons, 12 of I've got drivers that have 12 out of the current 20 seats, including Logan Sargeant, who was the latest graduate this year. Like this, we're stacked. I've said it many a time on this show, and I've said it on Twitter a few times before, on the website as well. We were spoiled. We were spoiled with junior talent from 2014 onwards. Verstappen, Leclerc, the class of 2018 with Norris, Albon, and Russell. Carlos Sainz is in the middle of that. Esteban Ocon's in the middle of that. It's had a huge knock-on effect on other younger drivers' careers. Cannavaro, a fantastic driver, never made it. Oscar Piastri had to do a year on the Pine. There would have been every chance he would have never been in an F1 seat if it wasn't for Zach Brown and his fucking around and actually getting lucky and finding out. If it wasn't for Daniel
Ricciardo being that poor at McLaren. I mean, Dre, it's a problem. We hit such a rich vein of talent. And all of them are there, and all of them are there to stay.
Right.
Because you're not going to slot a Verstappen or a Leclerc or a Russell out of their seats for the foreseeable future. They're your franchise guys. And it's like, because 4 or 5 of them hit Formula One all at once, well, now everyone's timers are off because those guys aren't going anywhere. And that just takes good, viable seats out of the rotation.
In a series that already has too few seats.
Yeah.
And look, having Andretti there wouldn't hurt, but I don't think it would help very much either. I think we would still eventually have this problem. You look at the situation, and almost every driver has at least one stable as one staple seat and one franchise driver that they can rely on. Red Bull has Verstappen. Ferrari has 2 of them. Mercedes has 2 of them. McLaren has 2 of them. Aston Martin has Fernando Alonso, who's still balling at 42, and the safest seat in Formula One with Lance Stroll alongside him. Williams has Albon. Haas, Nico Hulkenberg's had a very good season. Hulkenberg's been excellent.
Nico Hulkenberg,
still good.
Just
still good.
Absolutely curb stomped Kevin Magnussen this year.
Yeah. And K-Mag was a staple guy until this year. Like Alfa Romeo have Valtteri Bottas, who again was fine, but he was driving for a shit team this year. These are staple dudes. And look,
we've also glossed over the fact that we have had other drivers come in from Formula 2 and make the step up, but Mick Schumacher's not going to be on the grid next year. He might be transitioning out of Formula 1 as it currently stands. Nick DeVries, we've already kind of alluded to it, and his championship runner-up Nicholas Latifi is not doing racing.
Liam Lawson didn't do enough to make the cut. He'll be a reserve driver again. And how long does Lawson have to wait? Look, and Theo Pourchaire is the walking example of this problem. I love Theo Pourchaire, right? And look, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that swear by junior racing who know wheel on Twitter who are adamant that if you win a title in your third year, you're not good enough for Formula One.
But that's the other problem. None of the other third year, fourth year champions were 20 years old. People forget that Theo Pourchaire broke an F3 when he was 16.
You see, still the youngest Formula 2 race winner of all time at 17.
And now his reward is going to be going through the Liam Lawson, Stoffel Van Dorn, Pierre Gasly finishing school, because it's soon going to be announced that he'll be driving for Team Impel and Toyota, effectively creating a trade where Theo Pourchaire and Ayumu Iwasa are going to go to Super Formula in exchange for Rotoma Miata, their champion, going to F2.
Why? We're just kicking
it's a
cans
cool
around.
Trade. It's a cool trade.
It's a cool
Better than a
trade.
fax machine.
It's a cool trade. The problem is that Theo Pourchaire should have been in F1 2 years ago, in my opinion. I think his rookie season and his follow-up with Drugovich in 2022 was enough to get him in. But then two different team principals, Fred Vassar when he was still there at Alfa Romeo, and now Andreas Seidel, who's one of the best in the biz and is now CEO of that entire team, looked at the situation and rather keep Zhou Guanyu over Theo Pourchaire. And I think that's crazy, in my opinion. I think that's bonkers to me that Zhou got the pick twice over. Because I also think another problem here is that teams are becoming risk averse. They would rather have the devil they know than the devil they don't. And that's part of the problem. Like that might just save Logan Sargeant in the end, because there is realistically no better replacement right now.
Unless, Mercedes would have had an opportunity to go with the guy that was winning the most races in what was then GP2 at the time, plug him into that Williams seat. But they passed it up. And that's why, instead of Sam Bird, Williams got Felipe Massa to partner Valtteri Bottas in 2013. I don't think they're going to have a change of heart 11 years later.
Well, and Mercedes have been arguably the most risk-averse out of all of them, where they were hesitant to put people into their technically junior team in F1, and then really hesitant to move them up to the main team.
They passed over Esteban Ocon and Pascal Wehrlein and just about got away with it with George Russell. And that was a big gamble to put George Russell in that seat, given the Williams sample size was riddled with question marks.
But Trey, it's different now because Andrea Kimi Antonelli is him. He's the guy that all the people who know wheel that follow the juniors say he's good enough to where you could just overlook everybody else in the junior formula ladder because he's the one guy that's actually worth it.
He's got to walk into the same team as Ollie Behrman next year. Good luck.
Ollie Behrman, who was the series top rookie.
Yeah, and is already being eyed up by Haas right now because they are very high on Behrman from what I've been told. Like, if Behrman doesn't fuck up Formula 2 next year, he'll be in the Haas in 2025. I would pin my flag to the mast on that right now.
Even
on this
if he
podcast.
if he just finishes top 3 in the championship, I think he's got that Haas seat.
That'll be more than enough. Yeah, top 3 would be fine. That would be more than enough. And Behrman probably gets in over whether Hulkenberg gets pinched because apparently Sauber want him back over there as a safe pair of hands because they like Hulkenberg. They've worked with him before.
Talk about risk averse.
Yeah, like risk averse. You're going for 38-year-old Nico Hulkenberg again. Like
Nico Hulkenberg but the problem is Nico Hulkenberg is still cooking.
Yeah, I can't blame them because Hulkenberg was really good this year. He stood out in the worst car in Formula One this year. Like, he had 8 Q3 appearances in the worst car in F1?
Well, it does go well over a single lap, although the tires have already gone off by the 5th corner.
The rot's real. It's like, what's the interest level in Formula 3 where mid-level Freca prospects are jumping up 2 tiers that they really shouldn't because they're not getting enough trap time in F3?
I don't get it. Like, there's good. Like, this is the bottleneck. Like, I get why Andrea Kimi Antonelli is jumping up 2 tiers, but I also fear you're setting him up to fail by putting him in a Prima seat against Ollie Behrman straight away at age 17. That is risky. Like, don't get me wrong. You've got time. The problem is Theo Pourchaire had time, and that didn't work out for him either. And Mercedes have got two franchise drivers in their seats right now. Lewis Hamilton is still one of the best drivers in the world. George Russell's had a bit of a slump this year, but we know George Russell is better than what he's shown this year. In an ideal world, that could be their team for the next 5 years. Minimum. Hamilton says he wants 5 more years. He's prepared to race to his mid-40s. If that happens, what do you do, Antonelli, then? Where does he go?
What if you're Gabriel Bortoleto, who's already being overshadowed, and he just won the Formula 3 championship?
Oh, he's a McLaren Junior now. Oh, good luck over there, buddy. Having the best young team in Formula 1.
Yeah, if Mercedes could go another 5 years on their lineup, McLaren could go another 10 on theirs minimum.
McLaren has arguably a top 2 or 3 driver lineup in Formula 1. Its average age is 22 and a half. Good luck. What are we doing here?
They could go another 15 years on that same driver lineup.
Yeah, the sport is too good. It is too good for its own good. Look, right now, Nico Hülkenberg had a fantastic season in Formula 1. Objectively, by the eyes of most pundits, he was the 16th best driver in Formula 1 this year. That's the bar. Hülkenberg was number 16 in this. If Hülkenberg is the series' 16th best driver, we are fucked. Honestly. And that's not against Hulk, who, again, has been brilliant this year. That's just the quality of the field.
Yeah, it's one of the deepest fields we've had.
Ever. If Hülkenberg's your 16th best driver, what are we doing here?
Because unfortunately, Lance Stroll and Kevin Magnussen spent a fair amount of this year under the floor.
Logan Sargeant as well.
Secure. Yeah.
Yep.
But their seats are Sargeant might be the one gimme. And like I said, even if they move on from Sargeant, who are you putting in with it? Like we've got the top 3 in Formula 2 this year unavailable, unless you cut a deal with Mercedes for Frederic Vesti, maybe. But is Vesti a needle mover? Is that a sexy pick for anybody? It feels like a sunk cost fallacy problem. You're doing what you did last year with Sargeant, but you're doing it again with another guy instead. So what's the point? You might as well stick with Sargeant and see what you got for next year. You see what I mean? It's frustrating. Theo Pourchaire should be walking into Formula 1 right now, and he's going to be in Japan next year. No disrespect to Super Formula. I love it as a series, and I love watching it. But
it's not the easiest thing to watch in the world, is it?
No.
My time zones.
As a Brit, it's a bit tricky. But the problem is that Pourchaire shouldn't be in Super Formula. He should be in Formula 1. He's more than good enough to be in Formula 1. And yes, say what you will about it, we do think F1 is the pinnacle, because if we didn't think it would be, we wouldn't be getting so emotionally invested in seeing young, talented, exciting prospects get into the sport. Something that just isn't happening right now.
Yeah, I like it when young drivers find different ways to get to Formula 1, but the problem is nobody is finding any way to get to Formula 1 right now. And it's partially a good thing that the Formula 1 grid is so good. Say what you will, the worst drivers on this year's grid, miles away better.
It would run rings around the worst drivers of 20 years ago.
Yeah, back when we last had this problem where nobody was moving up, and the ones that were moving up were not that good.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just when we've talked at length on the show about the rot that has set in every path to Formula 1 outside of the official ladder. Well, the official ladder is backed up and no other path is getting anyone into F1 before this one is.
Because how is MotoGP able to have steady movement up and down, up, and F1 can't?
Generally, the riders market is a hell of a lot more volatile.
Yep.
Always has been.
Always has been. You're much more, shorter contracts, more talent in the junior classes, more poaching of young junior talent. The ladder is smoother than it's ever been, with teams having bikes in multiple categories now as well.
I say the death of the production-based ladder to MotoGP, because that's been gone for a decade now at least.
Yeah, so, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the next episode, because that'll just about do it here on this one. Don't worry, Formula One fans, or people that only listen to our F1 episodes. I know some of you guys are out there. We're going to take a week out after MotoGP, and then we'll be back the week after for our Formula One 2023 season review. We'll go into even more detail on all the runners and riders, the ups and downs and the in-betweens that was the 2023 Formula One season. But we've got one more bow to put on one more series in 2023, and that's MotoGP. And this one is industrial-sized, because there is a lot of shit that came out of Valencia, and not just the title fight either. There's a lot to get into on that one. I look forward to being able to break it all down with you guys next time out. But again, places you can find us one more time: Motorsport_101 on Twitter, at Dre_WTF1, at RJ O'Connell, at CBuckley917, Motorsport101 Pod on Instagram. Website, motorsport101.com, patreon.com/motorsport101. Again, early access, live listenership, all in there if you want to back us financially on there. We'll be back for MotoGP later in the week, and then after that, we'll take a little week out, and then afterwards, we'll be back with our F1 and MotoGP season reviews in a couple of weeks' time. But until then, I've been Dre Harrison, they've been RJ O'Connell and Cam Buckley, and until next time, sayonara.
Later, y'all. From the greatest season that there ever was. Let's never do this again.